Ashley Taylor, a young woman from Nebraska, went traveling after she finished college. She ended up staying in England, and on May 5th, 2009, after going through a relationship breakdown and losing her job, Ashley left the English city of Manchester and drove deep into the Royal South Wales. Little did she know that the harrowing events that were about to unfold there would change her life forever. This is Ashley's account of her horrifying events given to reporter Carly Hayton in Lincoln, Nebraska on October 9th, 2009. It all started in the springtime. That's when my life started to unravel. It had all been great before then. I thought the UK was where I belonged, was where I'd build my career and eventually start a family. It all came crashing down around me. I lost my partner, my job, everything. I just wanted to get away from the city I'd come to loathe. I had some severance pay from work, and I considered using it to book a plane ticket back home. I hesitated, as I knew my family would smother me, and I wasn't in the headspace to deal with their "I told you so's." So I was looking online when this advert popped up for this property in the countryside. It was this beautiful, thatched roof cottage. It reminded me of Aurora's cottage in Sleeping Beauty. I loved that movie as a kid. I couldn't believe the price. It was so cheap. It was like it was meant to be. So I messaged them and asked for more information. I received an email back almost instantly. In it, they told me that due to personal circumstances, they'd left the area, and as a result, they'd prefer to have someone occupying their cottage than not. Hence, the cheap rent. I impulsively agreed to a month-long stay and transferred over the deposit. Then they messaged me back, telling me that due to the remote location, the postcode wouldn't come up on any GPS, so they sent me some directions from the closest town, which was about 20 miles away. There was one more thing. This person didn't give me their number or include their full name. Instead, they signed everything with the letter N. Even their email address was cryptic and just included the name of the cottage, Ivy Cottage. I had guessed they were just a private person or something, and didn't question it further at the time. I packed up my car that same evening and drove through the night. At the time, I was just relieved to be out of the city, so once I was off the main road, and following my mystery landlord's directions, I didn't give much thought to how different my new surroundings seemed. Even in the darkness of the night, I could tell that the dirt roads appeared to grow narrower. It felt like they would span on forever, blurs of never-ending green. All of the roads looked the same. My GPS had stopped working ages ago, and I was just driving aimlessly. I regretted driving out there as it was getting dark, and cursed myself for being so dumb. I couldn't even park up somewhere and wait till morning as the roads were so darn narrow. That's when I saw them behind me. Headlights. I hadn't seen another car on the road since I'd passed the last town. Still, it stood to reason that other people lived out there too, so I continued driving. Only the vehicle behind me gained on me and began frantically flashing their lights and beeping their horn. There was nowhere to pull over, and the roads were far too narrow for them to pass me. So I sped up and drove around the narrow roads at an uncomfortable speed. I was freaking out. They were in such a hurry, and I didn't know the area. I didn't know what I was meant to do. By the time the narrow road had ended and spread out into a cluster of fields, I sighed in relief and immediately pulled over to let the vehicle behind me pass. I thought they'd zoom past, but to my horror they didn't. I felt sick with dread as they pulled up alongside me and wound down the window and looked at me. In the faint light, I could just make out that the driver was a young man, and someone was sitting next to them. Another man of a similar age. Their boxy red car was dusty, old, and beat up. There was a new sticker on the door. It looked like a skull with a snake coiled around it, but I couldn't tell for sure. The driver looked directly at me with this sinister gaze, and laughing, said, "It's our salvation. It's Nusquam." That's the first time I ever heard that word. Back then, I had no idea what it meant. The horror it entailed. If I'd known more then, I would have turned around and left that place. I would have left it before it infested my mind. At this point, I double-checked my doors were locked. As I saw it, I was in the middle of nowhere, with some lunatics who'd not only driven me off the road, but were now shrieking a nonsense word at me. So much for escaping the mayhem of the city. The driver looked at me and laughed. Then he drove off. I watched them go until they were out of sight and sound. I calmed myself down, rechecked my directions, and continued on my way, more determined than ever to find that cottage, as no chance I was staying out there with those crazy men driving around. I drove past the sign for it at first. A tree slice sign with a dripped black letters on it, Ivy Cottage. But in the corner of the sign was something else. A smudge drawing of some sort. I couldn't make it out in the limited light, so I reversed and drove up the bumpy lane. It was everything I imagined as much as it wasn't. This cottage with the thatched roof surrounded by wildflowers and gnarled trees. The key was left as specified beneath the red plant pot. I let myself in and had a quick look around the cottage before I went back to my car to get the rest of my stuff. I just wanted to lock myself inside for the night and leave it at that. That's when I saw her. A shadow in the night. A woman, about 50, with straggly long gray hair, was peering through the open door into my car. Seeing her unnerved me, and I sputtered out, "Excuse me." The woman stepped back and turned and smiled at me. She didn't seem surprised by my presence at all. She gave me a forced smile and said, "So you're the new girl." Without waiting for me to answer, she continued, "I live in the farmhouse over there." She pointed behind her. "We like our privacy, so never drive up the red gated lane. And if you need us, write a note and put it under the rock by the gate, and we'll get back to you shortly. You understand?" By this point, I just wanted to go inside, lock the doors, and escape the weirdness of this place. So I nodded at her, then muttered out, "Okay." My answer seemed to satisfy this woman, as she said something under her breath that I didn't make out, and then she walked off. I watched her shuffle up the lane with no flashlight or source of light. There were no other vehicles around, so she must have walked this way, in the dark. I was too tired to ponder on how freaky this was, so I unloaded my car and locked myself and my stuff inside. Home, sweet, weird as hell, home. It may have been crazy outside, but inside, the cottage was what I needed. Granted, it was worn in places and it needed a good dust, but it was away from the rest of the world. That's when I spotted it among the pile of my stuff. A pointed stone, palm-sized. On it was a picture, one that made me gasp on seeing it. A snake coiled through a skull. Just like the one on the men's car door, I didn't know how that stone got in amongst my stuff. Unless that woman put it there. I used a sweater to pick it up and chucked it through the window into a bush. I thought that was it. That was the last of it. But I was wrong. This was only the beginning. For the next few days it rained, so I didn't go beyond the cottage perimeters. A few times I swear I saw a shadow flit beyond the trees that surrounded the cottage, but I tried convincing myself that this was caused by the weather. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, and on one occasion, I looked out of the window and was sure. For a split second, I saw a pair of dark eyes staring back at me, there from behind the tree trunk. I told myself I was imagining things, and blamed it on stress. I closed the curtains, so I couldn't torment myself with the outside world anymore. I shut myself off for those next few days. Eventually, being cooped up inside started getting to me. So on one placid day, I decided to venture out and explore the area. On walking up the lane, I finally got to inspect the drawing on the sign. In daylight, despite it being smudged, I still made out exactly what it was. A snake, coiled around a skull. Only this wasn't drawn in black, like the rest of the sign. It was smudged red. And next to it was a small X. At that moment, I heard shuffling in the overgrowth behind me, and this crow flew out at me. Red eyes. I remember its red eyes. It squealed as it flapped its wings past my head. I shielded my head with my hands and emitted a scream. But when I looked up, there was no sign of the crow. I convinced myself I needed fresh air. That being cooped up had gotten to me. So I walked along those quiet, country roads. I walked. And I walked, noting the silence, noting the peace. Thinking about it now, I didn't hear any animals or insects. There was just stillness, silence. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I tripped over something and only just managed to steady my fall. I looked down and saw what I tripped on. It was a mangled black biker boot, my size, a woman's. The leather was scuffed, and the laces, there was something on them. I bent down and touched it, and this sticky red substance rubbed onto my fingers. I flinched in disgust and rubbed my fingers on my shirt. It didn't make sense that someone had lost a boot out there in the middle of nowhere. I left the boot where it was and carried on walking, my head full of more questions than answers. I eventually came to it. A dirt road with a red gate. I could make out the farmhouse up ahead. This must be where the crazy woman lived. I was looking down at the rock by the gate when I heard a bang. I looked up and saw a fog of smoke coming up near the farmhouse, followed by what I could have sworn were screams. Panicked, I didn't know what to do. The woman told me never to go up to the farmhouse, but what if there was something wrong. So I climbed over the gate and hurried up the long lane. To the side of the farmhouse was a field, I noticed. Surrounding it was barbed wire fence at least 6 feet high, and tangled in it were clumps. Clumps of what looked like bloody cloth, hair, and it was truly horrific. I should never have trespassed, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I turned around, ready to run until I was back to the cottage. That's when I heard something. Footsteps. I didn't think. I just reacted. I quickly hid somewhere. The side of the barn. My heart was in my throat. My head was fuzzy with fear. As I forced myself to peer around the side of the barn, I saw them. A man, 50-ish. His back was to me, and he was whistling as he pushed a wheelbarrow with a dark sheet over it. I kept on watching, mesmerized by fear. As he bumped the wheelbarrow along, something tumbled beneath the sheet. It took me a few seconds to register what it was, and when I did, I had wished more than anything that I could unsee it. Hanging out of it was a bloody, mauled, limp arm. I gasped out and immediately placed my hands over my mouth. The man stopped whistling and came to a halt. He peered around him, then proceeded to stick the arm under the sheet before he continued on his way. I know what I saw. This place, that man, it was all messed up. I tried to work through my frantic mind and figure out what to do. I didn't want to risk running into that man and becoming the latest victim to end up in his wheelbarrow. So I snuck into the barn to hide out for a little longer. I looked around me with shocked confusion. It was full of vehicles, at least 30 of them, or at least what was left of them. Slashed tires, smashed windshields, dented bumpers, melted paintwork, door handles, missing license plates. It was a vehicle graveyard, and I was in the middle of it. I saw a flash of red out of the corner of my eye, and I walked over to it. The car was nothing more than a wreck now. But that color, it was the same as the one those men had been in on my first night driving here. Remembering the sticker on the driver's door, I went to look. There was a faded patch of color there, and a symbol just about visible around the faded paintwork, a snake and a skull. I felt sick, and I thought this was it. That I was going to be stuck there forever. That I was going to meet the same fate as the owners of those messed up cars. I heard a door opening, footsteps, whistling. It was a tune that sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I knew it was that man. He was gaining on me. I darted behind the car, held my breath, and stayed as still as I could, as still as a mouse. I closed my eyes. I thought of somewhere else, of home. Then I realized something. The whistling had stopped. That's when I felt the hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around, expecting to see that man, expecting my life to be over. Only it wasn't him. That's when I saw her, a woman covered in dirt. It stuck to every part of her, dried, clumpy. I couldn't tell where her black dress ended and the dirt began. Both of her feet were bare and through the mud. I saw the cuts. Her one foot had a chunk missing from it, a mixture of mud and flesh. She must have been in agony, but she didn't show it. She was looking at me, glee in her eyes. I was frozen in fear. All I could do was look at her, into her eyes, and silently pray she wouldn't hurt me. Then suddenly she let go of my shoulder and pressed a muddied finger to my lips. The fingernail. Missing from the nail bed, an enlarged smile formed on her dirt-crusted face, and she looked at me. Just looked at me for seconds, minutes, I don't know how long, before she turned and walked off, dragging her injured foot as she went. With her back to me, I saw the fabric cut away on her dress, and there, on skin untouched by dirt, was a symbol, freshly carved in her skin, a blood-crusted snake entwined in a skull. I stayed there stunned and afraid. I stayed there for I don't know how long. I kept thinking someone would come for me and hurt me like they hurt that woman. I kept thinking I walked into my own demise. But they didn't come. I must have fallen asleep, but I don't remember doing so. And I don't remember leaving. The next thing I remember, I was staggering along the lane toward the red gate. The sky was darkening. This meant I had time missing. Hours. Hours I couldn't place. I'd been in the barn. That I was sure of. And then I was by the red gate, looking down at the rock again. I made out a word carved on it. Nosquam? I'd heard that word before. The man in the car had shouted it. Did he come here and was that really his car? If so, then where was he and his companion now? Were they to do with that woman? Is that why she had the same symbol from the car sticker carved into her back? What was this place? I don't know how I found my way back to the cottage, but I managed to. I thought about the bang, the bloody barbed wire, the limp arm and vehicles. That woman. I was in the middle of nowhere, all alone, with no signal on my phone. Then, as I headed toward the door, I saw it there, perched on the doorstep. That crow with the red eyes. I stared at it, and it stared at me. It was only when I blinked my eyes, and I looked again, that it had gone, a pile of churned up worms and bile in its place, and a stone, that pointed stone, with a snake coiled around a skull. The same rock I'd thrown in the bush on my first night here. If I didn't know it before, I knew it then. Someone was messing with me. There was nothing I could do in the dark, and I was barely conscious. I couldn't leave like that. I made sure I'd locked up, and then I went to bed, adamant I would leave at first light. I awoke to a thudding sound against my window, gradually increasing in rapidness. It caused me to wake up with a start. I put my bedside lamp on and crept over to the window and pulled back the curtains, afraid of what I would find, but not prepared for this. Pressed against the cracked glass was a blood-covered hand. Suddenly, a face appeared, a man's, bloodied and frantic. The right side sunken in more than the left. He looked straight at me, and he opened his mouth, and I saw that all the teeth on the right side were missing, a pool of blood and swollen gums in its place. He spat out some blood, then slurred out a word. I didn't have to hear him properly to know what it was. Nosquam. His blood was dripping all over the window. He smudged it there with his own hand, tracing his index finger through it as though he was drawing. He stuck his tongue out while he did this, a blur of grotesque pink in his ruined mouth. I grabbed a bread knife and flashlight out of the kitchen and went around the back of the cottage. With each bare footstep, each squelch in the muddy ground, I thought he would jump out at me. I thought I would end up like him. I forced myself forward, around the side of the house. There was no sign of the man, but I saw the bloody handprint on the bedroom window. And I shone the flashlight onto a splatter of ox-blood-colored liquid glistening in the darkness, on the symbol he'd drawn there. A snake coiled in a skull. The man had vanished. Terrified, I went back into the house and grabbed a jacket, my phone, and my car keys. Then I got into my car and drove out of there. I needed to leave this nightmare while I still could. A few miles into the narrow dirt road, I saw headlights coming toward me from the other direction. I could tell from the changing brightness in light that the vehicle was coming at a great speed. I didn't know what to do. There was nowhere for me to go, and in my panicked state, there's no way I could reverse all that distance. I put on my emergency lights, but the car didn't slow down. Not knowing what to do, I got out, furiously waving my arms. The car came to a screeching halt in front of me. A couple got out, a man and a woman, both wearing cargo trousers, hoodies, and baseball caps. They looked at me, threw me something, and then the girl laughed and said, "This is Nusquam." Before I even had a chance to register what was happening, they got into my car and began reversing away without a care. I looked at what they'd thrown at me. It was car keys, so with little other option left, I got into their car and drove after them. None of this made any sense, but in my gut, I knew where they were going. I followed them there. I saw my car speed along the lane toward that farmhouse. I pulled up outside of that farmhouse and stared up at the driveway. I stepped out of the car and was trying to work out what to do next, when I felt something crawling up my leg. I peered down and saw something there, a cockroach. I shrieked and flicked it away. But it wasn't alone. Scuttling beneath my feet were hundreds of the things. I kicked out my feet and stumbled backward. Soon I was tumbling over into the mass of dirt and cockroaches. I tried to scramble to my feet, but they crawled over my hands, legs, face, everywhere. They were everywhere. I flinched my arms, and a cockroach flew through the air and landed upside down on my side, on its underbelly, written in something red, was a single word. Nusquam. I left the car where it was, and I ran as fast as I could back to the cottage. I spent hours in the shower trying to wash all the traces of those things off me. It felt like a bad dream, but it was real. It was happening. I could smell them. Even after washing, I smelt their decay. I didn't sleep that night, but even with tiredness scratching at my brain, I knew that I couldn't stay in this unsettling place any longer. Knowing I had no other choice, at first light, I went to the red gate. There was no sign of the cockroaches, my car, or the couple. I quickly left a note beneath the rock. In it, I asked for a car so I could leave this place forever. 3 excruciating days, and I was left rationing food and feeling anxious about what I should do next. I was trapped, with no hope. When I heard a single knock on the door, I thought I was imagining it. This calmness came over me as I opened it and saw the whistling man there. I should have been petrified, but nothingness. I felt nothingness. He stood in front of my car, scratched, dented, and the engine humming. He didn't smile or frown. In a still voice, he said, "You can't leave, Nusquam, but you can try." I brushed past him and walked over to my car. I was in a trance. At least that's what it felt like. But my mouth had other ideas, and I found myself asking him, "What is this place? What is Nusquam?" He fell silent for what felt like minutes. Then a smirk contorted on his face, and he replied, "Nusquam is nowhere." I left this strange place in the middle of nowhere with none of my stuff. I didn't look back. Not once. I drove straight through the next town and didn't stop till the one after that. Then I messaged the landlord saying I was vacating the cottage early. But the email bounced back. That's not the only weird thing about it. All previous emails they'd sent to me, including the one containing the directions, had weirdly disappeared from my inbox. So I left that country and came home to Nebraska. But what happened there, it came with me. It still crawls on my skin. Still latches to my mind. I know I have to go back, but I don't want to. I don't want to. It left its mark on me. I don't know what it is. The man was right. I can't leave Nusquam. The only thing I am sure of is that Nusquam is nowhere. Throughout her conversation with the reporter, Ashley was anxious, distracted, and restless. Before she left Carly Hayton's house, she pulled back her hair and showed her something self-carved on the side of her neck, a symbol of a snake coiled around a skull. She became hysterical and admitted to carving it herself with a compass. Ashley fled before Carly could help her. The last recording sighting of her was on October 11th, 2009 at Cardiff Airport, Wales, UK. There have been no reported sightings of her since. The cottage and farmhouse Ashley spoke of have never been found, but on investigating, the police found proof of a deposit being wired from Ashley's account to an untraceable source under the reference name, Ivy Cottage. What truly happened to Ashley Taylor all those years ago remains a mystery, one lost to an unknown place, leading to nowhere. For more horror and scary stories, please subscribe.